I went on a Tinder date a couple years ago. Everything started out relatively normal. We met at a nice downtown restaurant for dinner. She was even prettier in person, and the conversation was flowing. However, it didn't take long for me to realize that she was a very private person. For example, she would not tell me her last name, where she worked, or say anything at all about her family. She made it clear that she was protecting herself, and honestly, I don't blame her. I shrugged it off and the date continued. She took great interest in the fact that I was in seminary, studying to be a pastor. That was nice because usually that's a deal breaker for most women, at least in my experience. Towards the end of our meal, she confessed something to me. "I have something to tell you," she said, "but please don't think I'm crazy." I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. She explained that she recently moved into a new apartment. She lived alone, which was also a new thing. Though she couldn't put her finger on it, she was convinced that there was a presence of a sinister and paranormal nature in her apartment. She had hardly slept since she moved in because she was plagued with constant nightmares and strange occurrences. I could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. She seemed quite sincere. "I can tell you're a good guy," she said. She elaborated that I seemed trustworthy and had a calming presence. "I know how this sounds, but would you please come back home with me tonight? Honestly, I'm just scared to go back there alone. I am not looking for sex." I was really taken back by this. It's not every day I get asked to spend the night with a beautiful woman whom I had just met. I figured she was either telling the truth or she picked a really odd way to initiate sex. Either way, the night would be interesting. We talked for a bit longer, and I agreed to spend the night with her. I followed her home, and when I walked into her apartment, I was immediately struck with bad vibes. There was just something ominous about that place. I didn't want to freak her out, so I kept these feelings to myself. I said a quick prayer and followed her to the bedroom. She wasn't kidding about the sex. I tried my luck, but was met with swift rejection. We kissed and cuddled for a bit, nothing too crazy, and then she fell asleep. I just laid there for a while in the silent darkness, lost in thought. Sometime later, I 100% heard someone walking down the hallway outside of the room. The door was closed, however, so I couldn't see anything. I was definitely frightened, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I went to investigate. Slowly, I opened the door. I looked to my left, and then to my right. Nothing. I walked downstairs to check out the rest of the apartment. Nothing. I went back upstairs to check the bathroom and the guest bedroom. Nothing. When I walked out of the guest room, which was right across from my date's bedroom, I looked to my left and to my right again. At the end of the hallway, I saw a black figure standing there perfectly still. It was almost like a shadow, but I could discern that it was, in fact, a three-dimensional figure. This figure was very large in stature. There's no way it could have been my date. She was maybe 5'1" at best. I ran back into my date's room. To my horror, she wasn't in bed where I left her. I called out her name, but there was no response. I had just walked through the entire apartment, so it literally made no sense to me that she wasn't there. The bed was low to the ground, so she couldn't be under it. The closet was opened also, and it was packed with boxes, so I knew that she wasn't there either. The window was shut tight, plus it was the second story. She had vanished. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and my cell phone and ran out of the apartment in nothing but my underwear. The shadowy figure was gone. I jumped in my car and sped away. I never heard from her again. Her Tinder profile was deleted the next day, and she never responded to any of my texts. To this day, I have no idea what the hell happened that night. I also never went back to her apartment. This was hands down the most terrifying, inexplicable thing that ever happened to me. I was sitting on my bed, trying to ignore the texts my abusive ex was sending me. I was dating my now husband, and my ex didn't take kindly to it. He was sending me text after text, switching between being apologetic and threatening me. I was sitting on the bed. The headboard was against the window, and I was leaning on it. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and text back, telling him to stay the hell away from me, when I hear his message tone go off right behind me. I turn around, open the curtains, and he was sitting right there in the bushes. This was a few years ago. I lived in an apartment, and in my room, if you looked out the window, you could see another building that had a lot of offices, and every night I would be able to see a black figure just standing there watching me. It was scary as hell. I tried flashing a light at it a few times to see a person or something, but it was just a black figure, and sometimes it would move. As soon as the sun would start setting, I would close the blinds, and I did that for a few months, and eventually the black figure didn't show up anymore. To this day, I still have no idea what or who it was, and it still creeps me out. I woke up one morning and started making eggs. I'm half asleep still, frying eggs, and I look to the right to the living room, and this old lady is standing there right outside the window staring at me, and she looked brain dead. Eventually she moved and disappeared out of sight. I went outside to find her, but she was gone, and I have never seen her since. We have an old farm that we let Animal Rescue keep rescued, abused horses on. One of the horses, a gigantic Clydesdale named Harvey, had a badly scarred, half-skeletal looking face. He was a walking nightmare, despite being about as dangerous as a wet saltine. One spring I was sleeping with the window open because I wasn't quite warm enough for the AC. I was woken up by a nuzzling on my leg and assumed it was one of my cats. Then I realized, wait, my cats shouldn't be in here. My windows are open, and I know I left my bedroom door closed. So I opened my eyes, and there is Harvey the horse, eating my blanket. I sat up and screamed, causing him to startle and rip my window out of my wall. My pulse was elevated, to say the least. My company would put us up in the Shiloh Inn downtown when we were in Salt Lake City. A coworker of mine was awakened in the middle of the night by sounds of a bunch of kids in the hallway. It went on for longer than he could tolerate, so he opened the room door to tell them to shush, only to find the hallway empty. He could still hear the children, so figuring that they were in an adjoining room, he called down to the front desk to complain. The man at the front desk claimed to be certain there were no kids staying on that floor, and that he was certain the noise would subside in a little bit. He offered to send up some earplugs if it did continue. My coworker was a bit annoyed. How can you say there are no kids here when I'm hearing kids? The next day when he was checking out, a different clerk made the mistake of asking the routine question. Was everything satisfactory with your stay? My coworker gave her an earful about the noisy children and how the other clerk had dismissed his complaints. The clerk looked a little uncomfortable and said in a half whisper, "We are not supposed to talk about our history with guests. Please do a Google search for Rachel David and you'll understand what happened to you. We get similar complaints every few weeks, and we try to never put kids on that floor." In the van on the way to the airport, he read on his phone the story of how a mother, Rachel David, had tossed her 7 children off of the 11th floor balcony of the hotel and then called the International Dunes to their deaths before jumping herself. My wife and I stayed in a pretty well-known hotel in London. The rooms were pretty nice, but had a door which allowed someone to travel between our room and the one next to us. To do so, you needed to open the door in my room, and then someone had to open theirs in the neighboring room. There was only one handle on each door. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I saw something moving around. It being the dark in the middle of the night, I just thought it was my wife and dismissed it. The next morning, I found our side of the door cracked open. My mom was traveling for work and sat next to a man, a fellow business traveler, on the plane. They had a casual conversation and exchanged business cards. Later that evening, she's in her hotel watching TV and gets a phone call from the front desk that her husband is there and that they want to know if they can give him a key to the room. She told them that she wasn't married. They called her down to the front after the man had left, and she identified him on the security camera. It was the guy that she had met on the airplane. I was traveling out of the country right after finishing up a huge 5-day work event, where I had about 10 hours of sleep total during the 5 days. I got to the motel, which is kind of run down, and the carpet and blankets are damp, but I'm so exhausted that I don't really care, and I don't really think about it. I fall asleep pretty much immediately at like 8 p.m. At maybe 11 p.m. or so, I get a call from the front desk saying that there's been a complaint about noise. I tell them that that's impossible, that I've been sleeping. They ask me if maybe it's someone else in the room, and I tell them no, I'm here alone, so there's definitely no one else making the noise, not from my room at least. They ask me again if I'm sure. I'm very frustrated at this point and I say yes, and then go back to sleep immediately once we hang up the phone. When I woke up in the morning and thought about it some more, I realized how weird the entire interaction was. There was absolutely no noise that I could hear anywhere nearby, and I don't know why the motel staff would need to clarify so many times that I was alone. Apparently, they never called, so I assume it must have been someone calling the different rooms to see who was in the rooms and how many people. I've never been so glad that the rooms come with that extra chain lock. When I was like 14 or 15, I went with my family to Las Vegas and we stayed off the main strip in a 2-bedroom suite. It was a smaller casino hotel. My parents left to go out and enjoy the night while I stayed with my younger siblings. They slept in the bedrooms and I was in the living room watching TV. I think I dozed off at around midnight, and when I woke up, I was in the stairwell, outside of the hotel room. I wasn't wearing shoes. I had no cell phone, no room key. I went to the front office and told them that I was locked out of my room, and thankfully they believed me and let me back in. I still don't know why I was out there or what the hell happened. To this day, I have never sleepwalked. Nobody has ever told me that I sleepwalk. I don't know what happened. Maybe that night I did. Maybe something happened during those hours that I cannot remember. But it was creepy enough for me to share. Probably the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to me. I arrived late at a hotel for a business trip. The flight had a malfunction, so we had to land. They fixed it on the tarmac and we never deplaned. Room already paid for, confirmation number in hand, etc. I got there about 5 hours after I was supposed to be there. Of course, they gave away my room. I already wasn't happy from all the delays, and I wasn't going anywhere. The event I was there for was in their hotel. I wanted my room. I was polite, but resolutely firm. They did some scrambling and asked if I would consider a damaged room that was under construction. As long as the sheets are clean so I can go to bed, I don't care, was my response. Mistake. The room they gave me was literally a crime scene. The case had been closed, so there was no legal issue to contend with, but someone had been killed, or at least nearly killed, in that room. They had primed over the blood stains on the walls and the ceiling, but had only taped down semi-clear plastic over the pooled blood on the carpets. Multiple small holes in the walls had obviously been patched and sanded, but they were multiple small holes in the walls. They gave me a completely new bed and TV from on-site inventory, so I was comfortable, but man, it was creepy as hell. The creepiest part was the priming job. It was so obviously blood splatter all over the walls. You could still see the pink underneath the white. You could see where the person had been hit and where they fell. You could also see how they tried to get up and where they had finally collapsed. I checked into a hotel on vacation. Everything was going all right. I woke up one night to erratic movement of the door handle, as if someone was trying to get in or break the door down. It always happened in the dead of the night when I was in a deep sleep. As soon as I woke up, it would stop. I spoke to a hotel manager about it, and he told me it was a patient who was recently released from a mental institution, who does this as he still thinks he's locked up in the institute. A combination of not taking his medication and sleepwalking makes him randomly try to open and kick down the doors within the hotel. The family was very wealthy and connected, and the manager didn't want to kick up a fuss for chucking out someone who can shut his business down very quickly and easily. I left after only 1 week because it seemed to get worse every night. This story still makes me shudder. We were traveling with another couple who had budget restrictions, and we needed to find a last-minute place to stay in Las Vegas. We had been looking forward to a nice hotel with a pool to kick it by and just chill out. They couldn't afford it, so they found a super cheap Airbnb with a pool. We were trying to be good, flexible travelers, so we agreed to compromise. As we were driving to the place, I tried to ignore the increasing amount of poverty and strung out people on drugs on the street looking lost. I pulled into the apartment lot, and I said nothing. My husband and I looked at each other. It looked like a seedy apartment place from District 13. As we walked into the building, I was overcome by the smell. It was sweet, and at the same time, horrible beyond belief, with a layer of perfume on top. My body would not let me breathe in the smell, and I had to cover my mouth with my shirt sleeve in order to breathe. I was on the tail end of the flu, so I had been nauseous for days, and figured I was just being sensitive. We hurried to see the pool, and it had a big sign, "Under renovation." Covering my mouth as we went back into the building, we checked out our apartment. It was clean, and the smell didn't permeate into it, so we agreed to stay. That next morning, I woke up having had the worst dreams of my life. People getting stabbed and shot. Constant horror all night in my head. My husband seemed interested in what I had dreamt about, and I didn't want to get into it, so I just said it was people being hurt. When we got home in a couple of days, I brought up the smell in the hallway. It wasn't until then that my husband told me that it was the odor of a decaying human body. Oh, thank you very much for telling me. My husband is a paramedic, so he knew for sure what the smell was. He smells the worst smells known to humanity on a weekly basis. At university, I used to work through the night to get projects finished, but would break at around 2 a.m. to go for a walk. The city where I studied had excellent footpaths that meant you could walk from anywhere to anywhere without crossing a single road. The path system had bridges and underpasses. One night, when my final project wasn't compiling for whatever reason, I went walking and found what I thought was a glove at the entrance to an underpass. Further inside was what looked like some refuse sacks. But something felt really wrong, so being an indestructible, naive 20-year-old, I investigated to find that the glove was actually a severed hand, and the refuse sacks were a dismembered body. One quick phone call to the police later, and I missed my deadline being questioned by the police. When I was 15, my much older cousin was going through a nasty divorce. She and her 2 little boys fled from her abusive husband and moved very far away to be closer to us, the rest of her family. Her husband ended up following her to our town and rented a room from a guy that he knew from years back. He was threatening her and the kids almost daily. I drove with my cousin to pick up her son from school one afternoon. She walked in and was told by the teacher that their father had collected them earlier that day. She completely freaked out and drove straight to the police station, where she begged them to accompany her to the apartment to get her kids back. We drove there with the 2 police officers in tow. When we arrived, an older lady was there banging on the door, saying that she hadn't heard from her son, the guy that owned the apartment, in days, and that she was worried. His car wasn't there, but she knew something wasn't right. Police eventually break in the door after speaking to the neighbors and hearing stories of a fight a few nights ago, and probably the awful smell coming from the inside. We found the guy he was living with dead, rolled up in a carpet behind the couch. I still remember the top of the head just barely sticking out of the rug when we all noticed it. They found her husband that afternoon, in the victim's car, with the 2 boys thankfully unharmed. He tried to use the guy's credit card to rent a car, but he probably knew that they would be looking for that one too. I had plans to take my grandma out to lunch one day. I showed up at her house at noon as I normally did, but she didn't answer the door. I walked around and entered her house through the back door. I found her body in the living room. She had been murdered. There was blood covering the walls and the ceiling. It still haunts me to think about it. A friend of mine had recently joined the police. She went through her training, and it's her first week on the job. She gets called out to this house as the neighbors reported not seeing the man for a couple of weeks. They get the spare key off a certain neighbor, who was the last to see him. They enter his house, and it is hot as hell in there. All the windows are shut, and all of the heaters are on full blast. The police go into the front room and find the guy face down on the couch. His skin had melted off, and he was molded to the couch. He was literally mush. It turns out the guy who had let the police in had murdered him, then arranged all the heaters to be on him so that all of the forensic evidence on the skin was destroyed. It was only after a few of his backstory lies didn't add up that they realized that it was this guy that had orchestrated the whole thing. A few years ago, when I was away in college, I went out to a party one night and got back to my dorm really late. At the time, I had my own bedroom. When I was in the bedroom, I had this weird feeling that someone was in there with me. I checked my closet, under my bed, etc., to make sure no one was playing a trick on me, but I could not shake the feeling off of me. It got so unbearable that I had to keep the light on. At one point, I heard laughing and just got so creeped out between hearing the laughing and feeling as if someone was in there with me. Eventually, I decided to just sleep in the living room, which had a very different vibe. At about 4 a.m., I made a Facebook post something along the lines of, "My bedroom is definitely haunted," and then finally went to sleep. Oddly enough, I had a dream about my great-great-aunt, and she was the youngest that I had ever seen her. I awoke the next day, and a roommate comes up to me and says, "I saw your Facebook status. Do you know what happened last night?" Completely confused, I asked her to explain. Apparently, while I was out that night, in my room, they heard laughing and the door shaking, and when two of my roommates entered, there was no one there, and they started freaking out. This all happened a few hours before I came back. Of course, my family saw the Facebook post and asked me a bunch of questions when I came home. My grandmother made the weirdest point. The night I posted the status was my great-great-aunt's birthday, the one I had dreamt about. One afternoon in college, I came back from classes and decided to sit on the couch and have a snack. After that, I just passed out. I had a nightmare of some bloody-faced demon thing screaming in my ear at the top of its lungs. I woke up and went about the rest of my day. My roommate comes back later that night and goes into his room as I'm sitting in the main living room area. At some point, he lets out this random startled scream, which leads to me running down the hall to see what's going on. He looks at me and says, "I swear to God, someone with a bloody face just peeked their head into the window." I never told him about the nightmare I had earlier in the day. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Nothing ever happened again. I was walking home one evening and was up on the road from my house about 5 minutes walk away. As I'm walking, I see this guy go up an alley, apparently not seeing something he was hoping to see, and turned around. We briefly made eye contact, but there was nothing to it, and he was walking really slowly. By the time I had walked another 30 seconds down the road, I looked back as I was turning the corner, and he had only just emerged back from that alley. I'm now heading down the road leading to my street, and there's a guy getting into his truck with his wife. The truck is facing up the street in my direction. He flashes his headlights, which I didn't quite understand, and then I hear a scuff behind me. The guy from the alley is right behind me, like within arm's reach. Even though I heard nothing until he was right there, I'm pretty sure I visibly jumped upon seeing him so close, and he's walking like an absolute demon. I mumble a greeting out of pure reflex and start to cross to the other side of the road, removing my backpack in the process. He didn't respond to my greeting or even look at me. He's just looking dead ahead like I'm not even there. He just starts running as soon as I moved. He bolts down the road and turns right into another alley, and I hear some banging on a wooden fence. As I walk past the alley about 30 seconds later, I take a glance, and it's empty. He must have jumped over a fence or something. I still don't know how that guy moved so fast to catch up to me in such a short space of time, nor how I didn't hear him. I've got some pretty good hearing, and he must have been sprinting to catch up to me. I work at several attractions for the Big Mouse that has tourist destinations in Orlando and Anaheim. When I first started working for the Mouse, I learned that most of the buildings were haunted in one form or another. Generally, I take this stuff with a grain of salt. Show me the science or prove it to me, then I'll believe. I've had 2 separate encounters with 2 ghosts in 2 different attractions. And let me tell you, I believe a hell of a lot more now. Experience 1. In a slow-moving journey through time, you come across a scene where a famous painter is laying on his back, painting the ceiling of a building. There is a ladder going up to that scene, and the rumor was that a maintenance guy had a heart attack during his shift one night and dropped at the base of the ladder. No one found him until the next morning, and he was already dead. It became a tradition upon closing the ride for the night to tell him good night, or else havoc would come down upon the ride the next day. Silly, I know, but we all just played along. I never really believed it. Everything seemed very circumstantial. On one particularly slow day, I was riding through the attraction when all of a sudden it stopped in that scene I mentioned earlier. Now, if you've ridden this ride, you'll know that it's basically a train car with 2 rows. Well, as far as I could see ahead of me, there was no one. As far as I could see behind me, there was no one. The ride system is pretty sophisticated. When someone hops out, there are pressure-sensitive mats on one side that trigger the ride to stop and show on our ride display screen exactly where it is. On the other side of the ride vehicle, there are photoelectric beams that also give the exact location of this intrusion, as we call them. Now, we stop this ride pretty often. Someone takes too long to get into the ride vehicle, stop it, and then start it back up again. Well, in this case, they started speaking over the intercom into the entire ride. That usually means someone is out of a vehicle somewhere on the ride. A few minutes into sitting there, I start to hear keys jingling. 2 sets headed in my direction. I'm completely alone, and here come my fellow Mouse employees, looking rather concerned. "Did you jump out?" Of course I hadn't, to which I told them. They look at each other and back at me, both looking from the opposite directions they've came from. "Did you see anyone?" I hadn't. It was just me. The mat and the I-beam were both triggered in this scene. We all just stare at each other and sort of whisper the ghost's name at each other. They leave, and within 5 minutes, we are moving again. But I never rode alone again. Experience number 2. This one was about the ride mission Space. Another attraction I work at is a motion simulator that spins and creates G-forces to simulate space flight. When the attraction first opened, there was only one option. The story goes that a mother brought her child in to experience the attraction, and when the attraction had finished, the child was unresponsive. Emergency services were called, and it was later discovered during the child's autopsy that he had an undiagnosed heart condition. This much is true. There's a fellow mouse employee that was working on that day and remembers the story. Multiple other mouse employees have looked up the story, myself included. Since then, it's been said that the ghost of that little boy likes to hang around in the ride room where he died. There are multiple reports of hearing him laughing during opening procedures, of him calling out for his mom, of the sensors going off before the ride starts, and upon checking the cameras, there being stuff in front of it that definitely wasn't there before, since we check all of the cameras before the ride starts. Again, I'm usually very skeptical about this sort of thing. One morning, I'm scheduled for an opening shift, which doesn't normally happen due to my low seniority. I show up and go to open ride room number 3, which is the room where this little boy met his tragic end. During opening checks, there is one person in each of the 4 rooms, all completing the same tasks. Ride rooms 1 and 2 are connected by a small closet, and ride rooms 3 and 4 are similarly connected by a small closet. We usually don't chat in the mornings with the person opening the other ride room, since we are all trying to get through our checklist as quickly as possible. I get to the part where I'm about to run the ride and check for errors at the end of my checklist, and go in to start closing up my vehicles. It gets pretty loud in there, to the point where if we need to get someone's attention, we have to raise our voices. I start to check my ride vehicles, and close the first 2 of the 10. That's when I start hearing laughing of a little boy. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's one of the other openers playing a joke on me, so I move on. I go to check the next 2. They're good, so I close them. I hear the laughter again, closer and louder this time. I turn around to check over my shoulder, and there's a faint flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. So I go to check and see what it is. There's nothing there. At this point, I'm spooked. I hurry and check the rest of my ride vehicles, close them up, and do a final check of my ride room before closing everything up and setting the ride to start. I hear the giggling again, turn around like last time, and there's a faint shimmer disappearing down the hallway. Of course, I chase it to see what was there. It turns out to be nothing again, so I go to the other ride room to see who is opening over there. A girl that I've worked with before quite a bit. She normally opens and tells me that she'd had similar experiences where it feels like someone is watching you, or just out of the corner of your eye, you can see something, but there's nothing there, and that the laughing sometimes gets to be downright creepy. Multiple people have encountered this little boy ghost at various times during the day, mostly under the conclusion that he's lonely. A few years ago, I was living in a fairly nice apartment complex, having a cigarette on my balcony around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night. I'm usually on my phone, but I get this weird chill and looked up to see a middle-aged man walking down the sidewalk across the complex. It struck me that he did not belong here, and I realized that he wasn't one of the residents. As I was thinking this, he suddenly stopped and looked right at me, making eerie, way too long eye contact, and then rushed off between buildings in the opposite direction of my apartment. I told my husband about it and joked that if we get a knock on our door in the next 15 minutes, we can assume it's that creeper. Sure as hell, 10 minutes later, there's this quiet, faint tap, tap, tap on our door. My eyes probably popped out of my head, and my husband jumped up to grab his gun from the other room. I slowly walked up to the door to look through the peephole, holding my breath. And there was the man I had seen, looking right at me through the peephole. I know he wasn't able to actually see me, but the image of him looking right into my eye still freaks me out to this day. My husband walked up to the door, stared through the peephole, and shouted, "What do you want?" in this threatening voice. Apparently, the man had his hand on the doorknob and jerked back in surprise to hear a man's voice. The guy asked for Jeremy or some made-up name, and my husband told him to leave. After bullshitting a little longer, the guy finally walked downstairs, only to peer up into the living room window from the lawn. I closed the blinds, and he moved over to stare at me through the balcony door. He didn't move on until after I shut that one too. We called security and gave a clear description and everything. A few days later, we got a report from our complex that an apartment had been robbed around the same time that night. What keeps me up at night is this question. If you're going to rob an apartment, why would you go to one that you definitely know a woman is awake and at home, seemingly alone? Maybe that's not what he had in mind at all.
Back when I was a kid, my mom and I had a deal. She'd schedule all my scarier appointments, like dentist visits and vaccines, in the morning, and if I went without whining or fussing too much, I'd get to play hooky for the rest of the school day, and we'd get lunch, go to the mall, and see a movie. This was one of those days. It was a few weeks before Christmas, but the mall was pretty quiet because it was around 1 on a weekday. I had taken my picture with Santa, we'd done some Christmas shopping, and had lunch at my favorite restaurant, and we were going to finish our day off with whatever kid's Christmas movie was playing at the time. I don't remember which one it was, but I remember how fun and pleasant the day had been. The theater itself was almost empty, just my mom and I and a few parents with kids too young to be in school. A few minutes later, a single man walked in. I remember him entering because I thought it was weird that he didn't have any kids with him, because he seemed to spend a long time surveying the theater, the way people do when they're trying to find a seat or two in a crowded auditorium. I remember him staring at me for quite a while, but then he sat down near the door and I didn't think too much about it. A girl I played with in my neighborhood had really strict parents, and they always went to see kids' movies alone first to be sure they approved of them. Maybe his kids went to school with me and he recognized me, and that was why his eyes had lingered. Just as the preview started, I realized I needed to pee. I had just turned 8 a few months earlier, and my mom was finally letting me do things without her accompanying me. As I got up to go, my mom slipped me a $10 bill and told me to get us some candy and soda. A real treat in my house. I was so excited to be trusted to go by myself and to get candy that I almost didn't notice when the man from earlier got up and followed closely behind me as I left the theater. Almost. As I was allowed to do things by myself more, my parents had drilled into me that I always needed to be aware of my surroundings and anything that felt off. And the way he bolted from his seat to follow me out of the theater felt off. To give a little context, the movie theater was attached to the mall, so the main entrance was through the mall itself. To make getting out a little easier, there were a few exit-only doors that led to the parking lot. The restrooms were right next to these. The man followed me all the way to the women's bathroom, not close enough to immediately spook me if I hadn't noticed him, but close enough that any passerby would assume he was a father trailing behind his daughter. After I got to the restroom, I peeked out. He had stationed himself just outside the entrance to the bathroom on the side closest to the exit. I told myself that maybe he needed to use the bathroom too, but clearly he didn't. So I went, and then I waited and waited. I heard a man's voice just outside joke with someone how he was waiting for his daughter who was dawdling. I knew my mom wouldn't get worried and come look for me immediately because she would assume I was in line to get snacks, but I couldn't get back to her without going past the man. Finally, a nice-looking older woman came in. As she was leaving, I told her I'd forgotten how to get back to my theater where my mom was waiting, and could she walk me there? I held her hand tightly as she cheerfully told me she was glad to help. As we left, the man waiting took a quick step forward, like he'd been waiting to grab me. When he saw that I was with the woman, he turned around and left out the exit door. I made it back to my mom without incident. I told her I didn't see any candy that I wanted, and I was kind of full from lunch anyway. In hindsight, I should have told her right away about the creepy guy who followed me, but I was afraid that I'd lose my precious new independence. But looking back as an adult, I still can't figure out any benign intentions that would explain his actions, and I desperately hope that he didn't catch some other little girl unaware. I am a 16-year-old male and I don't really partake in any sports. I'm a computer programmer, gamer, and avid comic book movie enthusiast. That being said, to compensate for my lack of physical activity, I work out at least 4 times a week to maintain a good physique. I have a membership at my local 24-hour gym. I started going 2 years ago. It's a pretty big establishment. They have multiple floors, but I usually spend my time in the main floor, which has a spacious room with all the workout equipment you could want. I usually do a full body workout when I go, so I tend to use all the equipment. That being said, about last week this started. After I finish my cardio, I go down to the padded area where people typically do their ab workouts, and I get started going through my routine. I'm in the middle of doing my plank and I notice a guy ostensibly staring at me. He was on my right and was wearing sunglasses, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt and wrote it off as him looking at something else, as I couldn't see his actual eye. As I proceed to my next exercise, he quickly leaves my head until I get to doing my squats. That's where he is very obviously staring at me. His head was turned in my direction. There was nothing else to look at. I give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just thinking about something. That thought was completely diminished when he came over and, without solicitation, touched me, proclaiming that I wasn't doing my squats right, which I of course knew was complete bullcrap. At this point, he has his hand on my glutes. Let me also say that I am very clearly underage. I don't look a day over 15. Everything about this situation was just wrong, and I knew it. I was honestly paralyzed. After I snapped out of it, I thanked him and told him that I got it. He smiled with the most perverted and creepy smile ever. He goes back to his area and continues to stare me down like a hawk stalking its prey. I stupidly don't report him and don't tell anybody about the situation. I was extremely perturbed nonetheless. I go back the next day and I pray that he isn't there. But lo and behold, I see him sitting around with his creepy sunglasses. When he sees me, he smiles creepily at me and waves. I don't reciprocate at all. I wanted to avoid all confrontation with this guy. Anyway, I do my cardio without incident, and when I get to the padded area, he is ostensibly not there. But in the middle of my workout, the guy plops down next to me and asks, "Hey buddy, how often do you come to the gym?" I was honestly startled, and responded with a slurred, "When I can." I put back in my earbuds and hoped that he would give him the signal that I had no interest in conversing. I start doing my push-ups, and out of the corner of my eye, the creep is just laying there, analyzing me. He then decided to give me an anatomy of the bicep. He started touching my arm. He was almost caressing it. I just awkwardly said, "Okay." I was trying to be as cordial as possible since I didn't want to retaliate and potentially mischaracterize him. I go to this gym often and didn't want to develop a reputation. He then started putting his hand toward my genitalia, and that's when I sprung up and just left. The people around me looked disconcerted, and one woman went up to me and asked if I knew this man, to which I replied no. I still don't report the guy, as I feared that I misconstrued what he was doing and he was just trying to help. The next couple of times I went, I didn't see him at all. But yesterday is when things escalated to the point where I knew this guy had malicious intentions. I am back at the ab workout area, and the guy doesn't confront me at all, but has his phone pointed at me in a suspicious way. It looked as if though he was taking pictures of me, or recording. I was freaked out, but I couldn't say anything because for all I knew he was reading an article or something. I was unsettled, but continued my workout. This isn't even the worst part. After my workout, I go to wash my hands in the locker room. People in there have a tendency to walk around naked, which I find to be really repulsive, but there's no rule against it. So this sick creep is in the locker room, and I curse myself under my breath. While I'm washing my hands, this guy comes up literally right behind me and says, "After working out, you should shower. Come with me, I'll help." I tell him that I'm immediately reporting him to the gym and the police. Everybody else in there hears this, and I don't know what happened to him in there, as I hauled it out of there as quick as possible. I do act according to my threat and report him to the gym, but I didn't have a name and there are no cameras in the locker room, so the only evidence I have is him touching me in the gym. I tell my father, and he is infuriated. My father goes to the same gym, and when I described the guy to him, my father said that he recognized who I was talking about. He said that the guy is always talking to younger people in the gym, and it has always creeped him out. No, that's all for now. We're gonna file a police report pretty soon, and I'll post as soon as there are any further details. Greetings from India. We are pretty close, my sister and I, even though I'm older than her by 4 years. This happened last November on my birthday. As you all know, our country is not the safest for girls. Not advisable for girls to travel alone. But we usually find a way around to do normal things and have normal experiences and dodge idiots. I live in one of the metro cities in the south, so it's comparatively safer. But all girls who are born here or live here have a radar of finding or dodging the weirdos. I had just gotten out of a really long relationship, almost 11 years, and wanted to celebrate my first single birthday in a really long time, away from the city and people I know. I had gone on a couple of solo trips and was pretty confident about taking care of myself and sniffing out the bloody weirdos. So we both decided to go to this beach destination I used to frequently go to. This would be my 5th time there. Every time I've been there, I've stayed at the same shack, so the folks running the place are familiar with me. We decided to stay at the place as we felt it would be safer since the season had just begun. This place had more tourists compared to the other places, because it's always safe to be around people. We were wrong. This beach gets a lot of tourists who first come to visit but decide to stay back indefinitely because it's spiritual, well known for the temple in town. It's beautiful, affordable, around $3 to $5 per night, and they usually get a discount from the shack owners if they're staying for long, and because of, the eat, pray, love sort of thing. This time around, there were around 50 to 60 tourists on the beach, so it was pretty private and secluded. We reached the day before my birthday and checked into our shack. We noticed a big group of guys staying in the shack opposite to us. They seemed to be in their own world and didn't bother us. Apart from the big group of guys, about 8 to 9, we met and shared a smoke with a French couple who were staying at the same place. We decided to unpack, change, shower, and head out to do some exploring. On our way out, we passed by the owner of the shack chatting with a couple of the tourists and regulars. I saw a couple of familiar faces, shack owner's wife, and some tourists who I've seen on my previous visits, and I'm guessing he stays there now. We walk around, read, play with the beach doggies, and have dinner at a neighboring place and are back to our shack by about 10-something in the night. We chill outside our shack, listen to music, talk, and by 12-something, it's my birthday now, we decided to call it a night. I made sure we leave the light outside and the door on, That way we can see through the blurred glass if someone's outside. We had played in the beach earlier, so we had put our shorts out to dry. Shack is pretty small. Our bed was facing the door and a double window right next to the door, so this shack is basically a hut made of bricks with a tiled roof. There's a small gap where the roof meets the walls, so we can hear everything happening outside and vice versa. My sister's out cold once we hit the bed, and I was up for a bit replying to my birthday texts and passed out by 1:20 a.m. I remember this distinctly as that was the last text I sent to my friend. At some point, I wake up with someone knocking on the door. At first, I thought it was just a dream and decided to go back to sleep, and as I was about to shut my eyes, I see someone outside the blurry window. Now I'm wide awake and on high alert. It could just be one of those other folks staying there, just walking around, but why would they be knocking on the door at 2 in the morning? I give it a minute or two to see if I was just imagining the knock. Maybe I heard loud footsteps or someone passing by. The weirdo knocks again. Not mistaking this for loud footsteps or anything else, I'm torn between waking my sister up or not. She panics easily, so I nudge her to wake her up and whisper that there's someone at the door. She thinks I'm dreaming, so she's asking me to go back to sleep. That's when we see the figure outside the window, but this time this fool is trying to open the sliding windows from the outside. I usually travel with a pepper spray and a Swiss knife, so I get up to get both. I was mad. I planned to stab this guy in his hand if he opened the window. He takes a turn between trying to push the door open and trying to get the window open. Since the outside light was on, we could see that the person is shirtless and fair-skinned, and wearing blue pants or shorts. My sister's anxiety increases every time he's at the window, trying to get it open. So on his 5th attempt, she says, "Who's out there?" He stops then and starts walking around our shack in circles. Earlier, we had noticed a couple of old chairs and tables stashed between our shack and the next one. We could hear him fiddle with the chairs and tables, maybe to find access, I don't know. At least, he's given up trying to break in. No way we can go back to sleep now, so we put the lights on so he knows we're awake and on guard. Now we were both furious and ready to kick this guy in the face. He stopped circling the shack after a good half an hour. We packed the next morning and decided to move to the next place. We stepped out of the shack and noticed the clothes we had hung out to dry are missing. I talked to the owner's wife and tell her about last night's incident. She seemed apologetic and said she heard the big group of guys making noise and playing loud music till late in the night. We heard them too, but we know the music and party stopped way before someone tried to break in, 'cause we would have heard it otherwise. I tell her this, and she seemed a little off and confused about the timings. We were waiting at the cafe for the owner's wife to return. She wanted to make sure that there were no damages, the usual protocol. We see the same tourist who was chatting with the owner the previous day, the same guy I've seen before during my last few visits. He's never talked to me before or the previous day. As he's passing by, we see he's wearing jean shorts. He stops to say hi and asks how our stay is and if we're having fun. He can clearly see us with our backpacks and that we're angry. We had passed this guy many times the day before, but he decides to say hi and talk to us now and ask if we're having fun. At this point, the owner's wife is back after inspecting the shack for damages, and she tells the guy we're leaving because of the noise in the night. He has the balls to tell us, "Are you sure? Maybe another night here will change your mind." He proceeds to ask us if we know where we were staying. I tell him even if I did know, I won't tell, because I don't want that noise to follow us to the new place. He smirks and says, "Let's hope." I'm not entirely sure if this guy was the person who was trying to break in, but the whole weird conversation and sudden interest in us made it convincing. Maybe we were just assuming it's him. Maybe he saw we were angry and wanted to have a conversation. Luckily, we moved to a better shack and made friends with the owners. Had a fun birthday after that. But to the creep who tried to break into our room on my birthday, next time, we'll be prepared for a fight. I'm a 27-year-old white woman living alone in Belize for almost 4 years. Small, 5'1", 115 pounds. I don't like to think of myself as easily scared. I work with gang-involved youth at the country's juvenile detention facility and at an outpatient mental health clinic. I have to admit, for a while before this incident, I was a bit more on edge because there had been a slew of Americans and Canadians that were taken out. Although all had been retirement age, criminals see this as having money. A few weeks ago, I was sleeping. It was already around midnight. At this point, I had been sleeping more than a couple of hours. I tried to get to bed by 9 p.m. because I had to catch my bus at 4:40. Anyway, I was sleeping, and I am suddenly woken up by a light shining on my face. Someone was outside my window with a flashlight. Immediately, and I never ever responded this way to being scared, I jump up out of bed and get to a point where he can't see me, in between my bedroom and kitchen, and start screaming at him. After my first episode of cussing at him, he says, "I'm here to check your water." I replied with more cussing and tell him that is not what he is there for, since it is midnight. Then this man asked if I had any water to give him. I was very confused by this, but I kept cussing and screaming at him. He just then quietly left. I called my landlord to let her know what had happened, and she thinks it's one of my neighbors. As I recall, when I first moved in, there was a man upstairs that my landlord introduced me to, and at the time, jokingly mentioned how he knows he likes white girls. I didn't sleep at all that night, and it took me 3 nights to go back to my bedroom. I moved my bed away from the window to the middle of the room. I did not call the police because they hardly do anything, even whenever something terrible is involved. Street harassment is terrible for women here, but it is a whole other story for white women, making walking in some areas less than pleasant. So, I am coming to you all for tips, tricks, and words of wisdom. I have a 2-hour commute to work both ways, ending in December when I get a transfer. My schedule is pretty set, and it would be easy to guess when and where I am if anybody were to watch. I have bars on my windows and locks on my doors. I want to know what I can do to help me be more safe. I can't get a dog since it's a very small apartment with no yard space. Once I get Wi-Fi, I can look into cameras. Any recommendations? And I already have a taser and mace. Let's start this off with some background on me back then. At the time, I was already a hardened recon trooper. This was my first long-term tour of combat. I had not even a month prior seen one of my best friends killed right in front of me, while 2 others were permanently maimed in a horrible ambush in the city. It was a nightmare watching my friend die from massive bleeding, us not being able to do much except give him morphine and keep him from the pain. That was terrible, and I will never forget that, but not even that spooked me to the core as much as this did. After that ambush, we were moved to this city to an FOB, forward operating base, like a small city walled in with concrete, T-wall barriers and HESCO barriers. Think big 4x4 boxes filled with earth and stacked 16 feet tall to create a huge wall, about 1 meter by 1 meter stacked 4 meters high. This particular fob was interesting in that some of its barriers to prevent easy entry in were simply huge mounds of dirt with guard towers planted on top of them to ensure people and vehicles didn't just run in at random. Being a recon force, we were tasked with constantly going outside the wire to do patrols and be the land and airspace quick readiness force if something happened and someone needed fast and skilled firepower or extraction. For this duty, we were assigned helicopters and light armored Humvees, and we lived next to the improvised airfield on the outskirts of the FOB. Our housing consisted of tents covered in an insulating foam to provide a more permanent structure, with air conditioning units to keep us cool as we slept and worked, maintaining our gear or whatever else. We lived 4 guys to a tent, as each of us had a ton of gear we had to keep mission ready for a variety of missions. There were 20 of us in total, separated into 2 squads or teams, and we shared this little tent village inside the wall together. In this instance, we had just gotten back from a late-night air assault mission. Fly to a place in a helicopter, shoot some bad people, grab intel and the important bodies and go home. Everyone had gone to bed after having finished cleaning our gear and eating. In the middle of our tent village was the latrine trailer, a house trailer fitted with showers, sinks, and toilets so we could keep ourselves clean. I woke up around 4 a.m. and needed to drop a deuce, so I grabbed my headlamp, flashlight with the headband so I could see in the fob, my rifle and one magazine, as mandated by command, and headed out of the tent to the John. As I was walking to the trailer, something just felt off. Maybe it was a slight change in air pressure. It didn't fully register in my mind as I just had to go, so I quickened my pace to the trailer, went inside and did my business. I pulled my shorts back up, washed my hands, and walked outside staring at the ground to make sure I didn't fall down the stairs in the trailer or stumble on some rocks. As I rounded the corner, I lifted my head and saw a pair of green glowing eyes set in the darkest fur I had ever seen, 12 inches from my face. I'm not a tall dude, around 5'7", and maybe it was just the adrenaline kicking in, but I swear this thing was looking me eye to eye. I figured I must be seeing things because I'm so tired, so I turned my head, and when I looked back, there was nothing there but a wisp of dust in the air. I stood there for a second trying to collect myself, and then I looked back at the ground and saw paw prints that were at least 4 inches wide, approximately 10 centimeters. If I hadn't just relieved myself seconds earlier, I probably would have at that point. I was shaking and sweating like I had just been in a firefight. I locked and loaded my rifle and peeked around the corner to make sure it wasn't still there, and made my way over to the radio tent to tell the two guys still awake what just happened, and then carefully made my way back to the tent and went to bed. The next day, one of the first bullet points on the daily briefing was about some huge panther that had escaped a local sheik's compound and was eating local shepherd's sheep at night, and now we should be on the lookout and never leave your tent without a battle buddy, as the guys all chuckled. There were signs posted at the chow hall and in the tiny shop on the FOB too. We never did see that thing again, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but I know that whenever I walked outside my tent late at night after that, I was always locked and loaded. When I was about 7 or 8, I was living with my family in their small apartment in a large city. The complex was pretty dense, lots of neighbors, lots of strangers. There was always a lot of traffic coming through, even through the night, so hearing someone walk up and down the stairs at 3 a.m. is pretty normal. I remember that my brother, around 5 years older than I, had only just began staying with us for a short time, and that we had, presumably, his Wii set up in the living room. Though it could have been mine, I can't quite remember when I got my own. The Wii was a newer system at this time, and I was a game junkie, so I was excited to play the system, especially with games like Guitar Hero already set up and ready for me. For the couple of weeks in the summer he was there, I was constantly playing the Wii in the latest hours of the night, usually staying up until 3 or 4 a.m., rocking out or bowling or Mario, you know the drill. I was already staying up pretty late before we got the Wii, but this was my excuse to keep doing it. My brother would often fall asleep on the couch behind me while I was playing around 1 a.m., and I'd play a little quieter until I finished. Although I was young and carefree at the time, I've always had a sort of knack for remaining situationally aware, and since I was especially good at eavesdropping, it was almost second nature for me to be consistently listening for anything and anyone, and pretending like I couldn't hear anything going on around me. Of course, I didn't realize I was doing this at the time, but I've had several years of growth and introspection since that time, and have come to learn the patterns of my behavior that remain even today. At first, everything was dandy, business as usual. Lots of gaming and lots of progress. After a day or two, I would notice people going up and down our stairs a lot more often. There was just a ton of rumbling outside at all hours of the night after midnight. I even heard a bit of talking, though I couldn't understand it, whether it was muffled or they were speaking Spanish. I'm still not sure to this day. A week or so after my brother was home, I have a distinct memory of hearing a sound and seeing an immediate flash of light outside. But when I turned my head to look at the window, covered by long vertical blinds except for one that had come off at the end, so the only view was a small sliver of our porch or balcony. All I saw was darkness. I turned back to my game and pretended to continue playing, hoping that nobody was outside, but also hoping that if anyone were there, they didn't notice me turn my head. I heard several distinctly mechanical noises throughout the rest of the night, and that I'm fairly certain were the sounds of the shutter of a camera, but no more flashes. After about 3 a.m., I decided I was probably hearing things from our neighbor's house and ignored it, packed it up, and went to sleep. This continued for about another week. The sounds of the camera and people walking back and forth throughout the night, that is. I didn't think it was really anything to worry about. I basically assumed at this point that it was all next door and that it didn't matter much. I never mentioned to my brother while he was there, nor my parents. I just continued my nightly ritual of playing the crap out of whatever game I could. After a week of hearing those noises outside, I had become curious about what was going on. I played that night until my brother went to sleep and carefully positioned myself in a way that I could hear quite well outside, but that it looked like I was entranced by my game, in case anybody was watching me. I wasn't really sure that was even the case, but I knew it was at least a possibility and wanted to appear oblivious if so. I had heard the characteristic rumbling of people going up and down the stairs, and I remember it quieting a bit around 1:30 a.m. However, I didn't hear the mechanical sounds and I didn't see any flashes, so I decided I was going to go outside to check it out. To paint the picture, our apartment complex was set up so that there were 8 units to each building, 4 in the front, 4 in the back. There are 2 units on the ground floor and 2 units on the second floor on either side of each building. Our apartment was on the top floor at the far end of one of these units, so you had to walk up the stairs and through an uncovered walkway to our balcony. There's a small porch right by the front door for seating that we had somewhat filled with various things. I remember specifically that there was a large printer or fax machine of some sort right on the ground in front of the window, basically centered below where the last blind gave way to the inside of the home, and a chair beside the printer, facing towards the open area between the porch and the walkway. So I quietly and slowly moved below the window, view from the window blocked by the couch that was up against the wall, and crawled to the front door. Slowly as ever, heart pounding from both anxiety and excitement, I unlocked the front door and tiptoed onto the balcony. There was nobody on our porch, and I didn't hear anybody walking outside next door. I peeked through the railing beside the walkway and my breath caught as I noticed several, maybe 5 dark figures standing in front of the entire unit, near a tree in between all of the units around. I couldn't tell who they were, but they all sounded male. It didn't appear that any of them saw me, so I continued to watch in silence for a time. Normally, it wouldn't trip me out much, but there was something just generally weird about the way that they were talking that felt suspicious. They looked wary, and the way they spoke sounded like they were angry, but I couldn't understand them. I thought they might have been where all the camera sounds were coming from, but I didn't see any cameras. I thought it was dark, and those faced away from me could have easily been carrying one. They didn't look like anybody I had seen in the complex before. I watched and listened for a long time, probably a half an hour, trying to see if they were the ones going up and down the stairs. However, they didn't appear to be leaving or doing much of anything at the time. I took that as confirmation that my suspicions were in vain, and that they were up to adult stuff that I didn't need to worry about. I turned around and went back into the apartment and decided I didn't need to stress about it anymore. The next night, I think my parents were upset that I had been playing video games all night for the last few nights because at about midnight I feigned sleep on the couch adjacent to the one my brother had been sleeping on. A while later, I heard my parents check the living room and stalk back to their bedroom. I quietly stood up and turned the Wii on. My dad had started up the shower and my mom was watching videos on the computer, so they didn't hear me playing. I did also keep the volume quite low. I was able to get some serious gaming done for a few minutes. At around 1 a.m., I started to hear the rumbling of the stairs. Although I had decided that what was going on was unrelated to me, I remember still feeling on edge about it. Then, a few minutes after hearing people come up and down the stairs, I began to hear a very distinct sound. The sound of some big object squeaking. I didn't understand what the noise was at the time, but it basically sounded like hardened plastic being bent and groaned from pressure. It also sounded extraordinarily close. I was sat on the floor in front of the couch my brother was sleeping on, so the window and front door were to my right, and I had a pretty clear view to the porch through the area that the blind was missing. It was dark outside, so I couldn't see anything, but once I heard this sound, I had major goosebumps, and something felt off, so I kept glancing at the sliver of window I could see. At this point, I was scared. I didn't understand what the sound was. I kept hearing people moving outside, and I didn't understand why. I assumed that they were right in front of our apartment and couldn't figure out what to do. The sound of pressure on plastic continued for about 2 minutes or so before it quieted down. At that point, I would hear the creaking of hard plastic every 30 seconds or so, maybe a little bit more frequent. I had the game on and kept moving my arms as though I was playing, but I wasn't paying attention to the game in the slightest. I don't even remember which one was on. Out of nowhere, everything went silent. I could hear no creaking, no shuffling of feet, no rumbling of the stairs, no voices, nothing at all. This put me over the edge, and for some reason I knew there was something seriously wrong. I was terrified. I thought they might be getting ready to break into our house and rob us, or something of the sort. I didn't really know what to think or what to do. A final roaring screech of plastic bending filled the air. I immediately turned my head all the way to the right, not caring whether they knew I could see them or not. I stared for a moment at the blackness, and a couple of $100 bills shone through it, illuminated by the light inside our house. It took a minute for me to comprehend what I was seeing. At first, all I saw was the money slowly being moved back and forth in front of the window. I was in shock at having my suspicions that there was something outside confirmed, and it took a minute before I saw gloves holding the money and arms extended into the darkness beyond. After a moment of utter confusion, I finally realized what was going on. There was somebody kneeling on top of our printer, shoving money at the window, trying to entice me to come outside. At this point, my fight-or-flight response kicked in, and being a scrawny 7 or 8-year-old girl left no option but the latter. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, and bolted out of the living room towards my parents' room. I remember the sound of the shower shutting off, my mom screaming "what happened" or something of the sort, and my dad eventually falling through with the same. Only about 30 seconds had passed, and I was filled with tears. All I could do was cry, eventually mumble something about there being someone outside. My dad, my amazingly protective dad, immediately grabbed his gun and went outside. It's about 1:30 a.m. at this point, and my mom held me while I cried in the living room, and we waited patiently for my dad to find out who was out there. My dad came back a few minutes later and stated that he didn't see anybody out there anymore, but that he was going to stay outside with his gun and wait there for a while. I was tired from the anxiety and finally having this all come to a head, but I could not find sleep. The only thing I could do was listen to my heart beating and wait. My dad sat on the chair of our porch all night, quietly waiting with his gun for anyone to show. My mom consoled me the entire time and told me that if this ever happens again, to walk calmly to their rooms so that my screaming doesn't scare them away. I didn't tell her about the fact that I had been hearing these people outside for the last few weeks, and I never mentioned that I thought that they had a camera, or that they may have taken photos of me. I don't know why. I was just so shaken up, and by the time I even thought about the noises I'd heard, it had been long enough that I didn't want to talk about it. They didn't contact the police, and my dad stayed out there until the sun finally surfaced at around 6 a.m. My dad never saw a soul in a complex that was nearly always busy. Only then could I finally find sleep, and needless to say, the blinds were covered from that point on. I stopped staying up at night, especially alone, and we moved away from that complex shortly thereafter. I actually developed a fear of open, unobstructed windows, and especially refused to be near a window at night. It still affects me to this day, though not nearly as bad, unbeknownst to anyone I associate with, even my fiancé. I didn't really understand why my parents didn't call the cops, but Later on, I found out that my parents used drugs, and I assumed from then on that it was just to make sure that there weren't any issues with CPS or getting caught. However, I had to talk with my parents about it several years later, and they assumed that I had a bad dream after they saw I was asleep in the living room and that there was never anybody there. It hurt when they told me about that, and due to their apprehension to believe me, I've never told another person. All I have is my own memory, and only I know what truly happened in those weeks. Recently, I've had a bit of a rough time, with old childhood memories that I suppress being brought to the forefront of my mind, and though I don't have the time or energy to tell them all, I may perhaps come to terms with them eventually, and I'll continue to tell my story on my own time. For all I know, if my dad wasn't there that night, I'd be kidnapped, and God knows what else.
This happened around 2012, but I remember most of what happened clear as day. It's a long story, but you'll soon know about the incident with the people that I never want to run into ever again. I worked with my girlfriend at a busy restaurant. We worked all the time, and it was very stressful. We took off a few days and decided to fly somewhere to get away from work and people and the town in general. I found decent deals and flights to Ocean City, Maryland, for 2 nights. She had never been on a plane. We loved the beach, and I could hit up all the local crab cake spots. It was perfect. We flew into Baltimore and rented a car. Nothing memorable happened the first day. We laid on the beach, we hit up all the local shops and had forgettable food. The second full day, we woke up and went to the most recommended stop for crab cakes, and on the way back we stopped and got a crab cake to go from 2 other recommended places for later. We stopped by the hotel to drop off the food and went to the hotel bar for a few drinks. My girlfriend at the time was a smoker and I hated it. She also would attract attention from guys, which I would deal with but wasn't thrilled about. We go to the rooftop bar at the hotel, and the bar itself is a 4-sided island in the middle of the patio. It's probably 2 p.m. and a clear sunny day. We pull up chairs and there's only a few women on the left side of the bar and a guy bartending behind it. We got obligatory house margaritas. After her first drink, my girlfriend felt like she wanted to smoke, but the girls and the bartender didn't have one to bum her. We got refills and schmoozed the bartender about the areas and things to do, but mainly kept to ourselves. The bartender seemed as if he was being fake. Something was off and I couldn't put my finger on it. A feeling of, I really don't even want to run to the restroom and leave her alone at the bar because I don't trust something. More than a few times he asked us if we were staying at the hotel. I think I said no. The girlfriend said yes. He asked us what room at one point. My girlfriend went to use the restroom. A minute later I heard guys' voices. I didn't realize there was a group of 3 to 4 guys that sat at a table directly behind us. They were either playing cards or just smoking, but they made some comment to her when she walked back. We finished our drinks and were Googling tropical drinks for her and area hotspots to check out. The guys came up on either side of us and talked to the bartender and got beers. You could tell they were either friends or regulars. I honestly couldn't tell you if they were there when we came to the bar or came after, but they had a sleazy vibe. The girlfriend and I ended up walking to the only other couple at the bar that had come and sat down. It was nice to be away and just relax. We always like making new friends. I didn't realize it, but one of the guys came up and either brushed against my girl or made a comment and rubbed her the wrong way. So in her infinite wisdom, she wanted to be bothersome to them and got up and asked to bum a smoke. I didn't realize it until I turned around and there she was, talking to the guy with his shirt unbuttoned and gold chains hanging on his chest. I didn't want her associating with them, but if one gave her a smoke, I would get the guy a beer if it meant we didn't have to leave the bar to hit a store for smokes. She came back without a cigarette, mad. Apparently the guys kept asking, "What's in it for us?" and said, "Your boyfriend wants to fight us, then why would we give you anything?" I didn't want to fight them. I was on vacation and I wasn't paying any attention to them, but I didn't like the implication of the other comment at all. Because we had such a lackluster first day, I wanted to pack in fun things this day. So this drink was my last one. I asked for the tab, and the guy of the couple we met gave us his business card. He said we should meet him and his girlfriend at Secrets at 8 p.m. The guys behind us kind of swarmed in on all sides and slammed down a pack of cigarettes, with 2 smokes left inside, in between me and my girlfriend. They said something like, "Here," then they ordered another round. We found it odd, but I thanked them and offered them a shot. I don't even think they replied. One asked if we were vacationing, then asked if we were staying at the hotel, then took the round of beers back to the table. I had a weird feeling, as if they were locals and didn't like us because we were visitors. Turning back to the bar, my drink was now completely full. Stupid me didn't even question it. I didn't want a refill, but figured the bartender topped me off. I took a sip, and the drink was strong. I just closed out, so maybe it was a thank you for the tip drink. It was disgustingly strong. I told my girl to try it. Boozy Susie over here takes a huge pull from my drink and nearly spit it back out. It was gross. She made a face and said that it shouldn't taste like that. I couldn't even ask the bartender about it, because he was gone. I don't know when he disappeared, but he was nowhere to be found. I can't remember if I fully finished that nasty drink. My girlfriend said something along the lines of, "The guys are staring, let's go." I was originally worried she was going to chat them up and thank them before we left, but she said she felt weird. The whole vibe changed, and she wanted to go. I remember spending a minute or two saying goodbye to the couple that we were going to meet later and heading towards the doors of the hotel. The guys weren't at their table. Patio door, elevator, hotel room door, bed. My eyes opened and I turned my head right. The alarm clock reached 3 a.m. I'm face down in bed on top of the covers. I push myself up, slide back off the bed, and stand up. The sliding glass doors are wide open, as are the screen doors to the balcony. There's a breeze. I think, did my girlfriend jump off the balcony? And in that millisecond, I hear crying behind me. My girlfriend is sitting Indian style on the floor, with a clamshell of what was $40 worth of crab cakes in her lap, crying. She said she couldn't wake me up. She asked me if I had remembered what happened. She said she had been sick and been throwing up for 4 hours non-stop. What happened? I bent over to sit down with her and got hit with a wave of sickness, and I ran to the bathroom for hours puking. By the time I came out, she was passed out again. This had to be a bad dream. I remember thinking that maybe we went to the club and got wasted and blacked out, and I went back to bed. We both wake up at 7 a.m. to our alarms. We had to take the rental to Baltimore and catch a flight back. We both had to be work at 2 today. I was shaking. She looked like hell. We both felt like death. She was shook. She said the walk back to the hotel room was scary and she didn't remember anything after. Wait, what? According to her, when we walked into the hotel from the bar patio, one of the guys was on a chair near the elevators. He said something to us, but the doors closed quickly. She said when we got to our floor, 2 of the guys were at the end of the hall, heading towards us. She said that when we got to the room, they stood outside the door, and she thinks they knocked. Apparently, I laid on the bed, and immediately was lights out. She couldn't wake me, and passed out herself, until she woke up to violent vomit for hours. My body was shot, I was shaking, and now I'm processing that these scumbags maybe followed us to our room. Part of me thought she was exaggerating, but you know how you have a weird slow-motion flashback? Well, as I was graying out on the way to the hotel room, I remember one of the guys being by the elevator. Also, as she was brushing her teeth, her mouth was blue. I went to the mirror and so was mine, neon blue. Nothing we had that day was blue. I had light green margaritas and vodka and root beer. This was proof that something fishy had to have happened. We didn't know what to do. We had to get back. We couldn't stick around. We got to the car. I barely felt okay to drive, but I wanted to be home. We felt dirty. We were so confused. And we wanted out of Maryland and swore we were never coming back. We missed our flight, explained the situation to the desk, and somehow got put on another flight back home. We sat in the airport for hours, dying. The flight was painful too. We made it to work a few hours late that day. Nobody believed our story and thought we made it up just because we're being late, and we kind of never brought it up again. I googled to see if similar situations happened and found nothing. We googled blue tongue and saw it's a side effect of a drug. I'll be honest, I felt lucky we made it out of there. I don't know if we were a target of a room invasion or a robbery, or if they wanted to attack or kidnap my girl. It could have turned out ugly in a lot of different ways. What if my girlfriend didn't take a huge swig? What if I drank the whole thing by myself? How close did I come to an OD or death depending on the drug and its interactions with alcohol? I swear the bartender was in on it. I did call the hotel and asked if there was any issues with the people being drugged or room robberies. And they said no, they have 0 incidents, and I think I let it go. I emailed the hotel from a throwaway email I created and told them to watch the hotel roof bar and the bartender, and never got a reply. I realize this is a long story, but that's my story, and I think about it anytime someone brings up Maryland. This is hands down the only time in my life my gut reacted this strongly to a stranger, so I thought it was worth a share. One extremely rare day where there was no work, no class, and nice weather when I was 19, I decided to go thrifting. So I drove a few towns over to a store in a rural area where I'd always had decent luck. I decided to do a gallery wall in my bedroom and needed some cheap frames. I'm on the phone with my mom as I wander through the store. As I approach the frame aisle, I notice a 30 to 40-ish man standing alone. Not in an aisle or looking at anything, just intensely staring at me with a large, almost comical grin on his face. In the back of my mind, I recall how long I'd been in the store, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and wonder if he'd been staring at me the whole time, or did I just notice? This prospect made me feel weird, not wanting to take any chances and believing back then I could dispel any potential weirdness with confrontation. I looked him in the face and said, "How's it going?" in a tone that I hoped implied I'm not interested in any sort of weird stuff today. He says nothing, almost like it didn't register with him. He keeps staring as I walked past, still with the huge, bizarre grin. I round up an armful of frames and began laying them out on the floor. It's early afternoon on a weekday, and there are very few people in the store that I would be inconveniencing by spreading out. Sitting on the floor, still on the phone with my mom, I notice a shadow over my work, and it dawns on me that the man not only hasn't moved on to keep shopping, he is standing over me, not saying a word. My mom picks this moment to want to hang up with me. I try to stall her, but she's at work, so I let her go. I refuse to be deterred from my mission, so I glance at him and keep arranging. But at this point, the warning bells were reaching atomic levels in my brain, and I'm getting jittery. I've never had this reaction before to a stranger acting strange, so something was wrong. Still grinning and staring, he finally says, "You're pretty." "Thanks," I reply. "Where do you go to school?" I'm so nervous at this point I actually blurt out the truth. There are 14,000 students at my university, I think to myself. He doesn't know who I am. He would never find me if worse comes to worse. He doesn't say another word and continues to stare, still grinning. My warning bells are becoming so loud I can't focus. So I gather whatever I had on the floor and stand up to leave, pretending to answer my phone. 19-year-old me wouldn't have dreamed of abandoning a conversation without a polite exit, even with a weirdo, and I stand up, turned, and left this guy. I make my way to the checkout and pray he wouldn't follow me to wait in line. He doesn't. He leaves. Thank God. I thought, why are some people so oblivious to social awkwardness? More so, why was I so freaked out by this guy? It's not like he was the first creeper to ever creep. I stand in the longish line, inspecting my purchases, a little impressed that despite my distress, the haphazard grab I'd made yielded some decent finds. It's important to know at this point there is a main entrance at the front of the building, and a side door opposite to the corner as the front door. The parking area is an L shape, surrounding the exits. My car is parked smack dab in the corner between the two exits. From any point in the store you cannot see my car, I let my gaze drift over to the side exit, where I see the man walking through the parking lot. There he goes. Weird. As he walks, he is staring at me through the door. A minute later, I see him pass by the front entrance, which makes no sense because there is no exit to the road from that direction. You can't even get to the sidewalk from there. Maybe his car is parked over that way? He is still staring at me. Another minute passes, and he's revised course to meander back past the front entrance, then past the side entrance again, the whole time still making eye contact with me as I'm waiting inside the store. It dawns on me that he is covering the exits and possibly my car. But how would he know it's my car? Because you told him which school you go to, and your bright yellow school parking pass is hanging on your dashboard plain as day, you idiot. Being a cocky 19-year-old means you don't often realize you should be worried about some things. And yet I am petrified when I realize this. I did something I'd never done until then, and haven't had to do since. Red-faced and flustered, I told the cashier because I didn't know what to do. She immediately offers a male employee to walk me to my car, and before me appears a high school friend who I forgot worked there. He grabs my bags and walks me to my car, where the man is standing by my driver's side door. My friend loads my things into the back seat, actually having to motion to this guy to get out of the way, and we make a few words of small talk while the guy stands awkwardly in our conversation, trying to appear casual and unsure now how to proceed with whatever he was trying to do. He never says a single freaking word. My friend closes the door behind me, gives the man a pointed enough look that he starts to wander away, and I speed towards the road. In my rear view, I see the man walking out of the parking lot towards the road. He hadn't even arrived in a car or with anybody. He wasn't waiting for anyone but me. When I left, his business was finished, or maybe even thwarted. I couldn't stop wondering if his plan was just continued, awkward small talk until I could extricate myself, or if he wanted to leave in my car, possibly by force. I've recently begun helping my mom sell my childhood home, and it sparked the memory of possibly the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. My friends and I were 15. I grew up in a subdivision about 20 minutes away from any towns. It was a very safe neighborhood, streetlights on the corners, lots of kids. Lots of my classmates lived there as well, and there was never any fear with us walking to each other's houses or staying out after dark. My subdivision was about 3 miles long, and I lived at the very end of it. The last mile is a sharp right turn into a hill, and has thick woods along both sides of the street, with 4 houses at the bottom, all surrounded by woods. My friend Maddie lived at the entrance of the subdivision. One year we got about 8 inches of snow and ice. It shut down the roads. People were stranded, schools were closed for a week. The first days of this snow, me and Maddie and Kelly spent the whole day playing. We decided to have a big sleepover at Maddie's house that night. When the sun looked like it might start setting, we started to trek down to my house to get the overnight bag. By the time we finished packing, it was dark out. The woods always enchanted by darkness, but it didn't bother us. The 3 of us started walking, joking, enjoying the night air. As we cleared the top of the hill, we saw something that made us stop in our tracks. A hooded figure standing on the corner, illuminated only by the street light. They didn't move. They stood completely stiff, staring straight ahead. It was unsettling, but it easily could have been a neighbor, so with nervous laughs, we started descending the hill. The figure never moved, staring straight ahead. As we got to the bottom, we could see the hood was lined with fur, and they had some sort of black mask hiding their features. We started to get nervous. At this point, we are even with this person. It's blackout, the one streetlight illuminating the corner. After staring at the figure for about 45 seconds, Madeline finally called out, "Hey, stop messing with us. It's not funny." At this point, the figure moved, only shuffling its feet to turn its body in our direction. They extended their hand towards us. Time stopped. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The figure gestured, "Come here," before turning and walking into the woods. We ran as fast as our feet would take us, until we reached Maddie's house and deadbolted the door behind us. The next morning when I walked home, I stopped at the corner where the figure had been and felt pure, genuine fear. There were 2 tracks of footprints, one leading out of the woods and one leading back in. Okay, so first of all, I don't want this to seem like a story in search for sympathy, but more of a way to finally accept it and move on, and hopefully help other girls or boys realize these red flags in a relationship that I so blindly overlooked. I'm sorry if the story is a little long, but bear with me, it's worth the listen. Background information. I'm 18 years old. I met this boy. We'll call him Trent. Trent and I met through a mutual friendship group of friends that I was very close with for many years. We started hanging out as a group to smoke with our friends. He was the loveliest boy with such kind eyes and the most adorable smile. I was infatuated. Trent had a past before I knew him. Troubles with past girlfriends and a bit known for a bad temper. But I ignored the warning signs from multiple people and even an ex of his, assuming the classic lie, "He'll never hurt me though." We started dating late March last year, 21st to be exact. He asked me out on a night when we had taken a lot of Xanax for fun with his friends, and was expressing to me and his friends within 2 months of knowing him how he was completely head over heels for me, and that made me fall deeper and deeper. Everything was so exciting and new, and he gave me butterflies. Side note to this, I had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and bipolar 2 disorder, which just adds to the fun of my life. All was good until about 4 months of being together. I was at home one night, planning to push through it and go out for some drinks with him and some friends, but changed my mind as I physically could not leave my bed. That night he disappeared. His phone was off for hours and worried me sick. In the morning I wake up to a message saying his phone had gotten broken when he got pushed into a pool and had to leave it to sit in rice overnight. He came over to my house that day and took care of me while I was sick. 2 months go by, and I found out 3 days before my birthday that on that exact night he had cheated on me after he enticed his ex-girlfriend to go over to his house, saying that he was going to take his own life because we had a fight and I wouldn't speak to him anymore. They had sex that night, and when I found out, it broke me. My heart ached and raced. It pounded in my chest, and I left his house in tears, with him chasing me up the street. I hid in a driveway and turned off my tracking location that he set up on my phone, and caught the first bus that I saw after hiding and watching him pace around the streets, shirtless and shoeless while searching for me. An hour later, I decided to answer his call number 23 or so, and tell him to leave me alone. It was then that he screamed and cried and begged, but I didn't give in, and so ended the call. 2 minutes later, he called me saying he needed to go to the hospital, as he shattered his hand while punching a hole in a glass mirror behind his door. After a few weeks of my heart longing for him, and him begging for me, I felt like he must have really loved me to do all of this, the stupidest mistake I've ever made. His behavior continued throughout our 6-month relationship. If I didn't answer a phone call, I would receive 10 within 5 minutes, and 10 messages of how I was a dog. Even if I had just left my phone in a room for 20 minutes while I had dinner, he demanded to see me all the time, and begged to be by my side every minute. I saw all of this as an expression of his love to me. Our relationship was spent majorly smoking weed daily, and I mean all day. If he wasn't stoned, all hell would break loose until he could get high again. I spent hundreds of dollars buying weed to help him feel better when we would argue in the car, or he would be in a bad mood. He had made threats to me and my friends in the past about killing all of the dogs. My friends did not see it the way I did, and eventually we had fallen outs, and he assured me that they weren't my true friends. He was the only real person I had in my life who truly cared and loved me, and I believed it. My confidence diminished. My happiness was released in the smallest doses. I began to stop recognizing the girl who I was, and couldn't remember how it felt to have genuine happiness. Only when he was in a good mood and wanted to be intimate and cuddly, that's when I felt good. On our 6 months, we had a lovely dinner in the city, at a super expensive restaurant. After our meal and a few drinks, he told me to go wait around the corner for him while he paid and I called a cab. I found out when he walked out that he had not paid, and we made a run for it. Later that night, we went to visit our 2 best friends who were also a couple and were part of our smoking squad, as we like to call ourselves. We decided to go for a little drive around the corner and smoke a little bit before going home. It was while we were chopping up that me and my friend Bella were whispering in the back. Trent couldn't quite understand what we were talking about and demanded to know what we were saying. As a joke, Bella sarcastically replied that I was talking about another boy. This is when he ran over to the side of the car. As he did this, I pulled the lock on her door, and he punched a hole straight through her window, leaving shatters of glass flying all over him. The police came for a noise complaint, and after coming up with an excuse, I was left to walk my boyfriend home while he was sobbing and apologizing. Eventually, we were escorted home in the police car. We broke up that weekend after encounters of him smashing his head into a wall, swiping a photo frame off the table and slicing his hand, punching a hole in my brother's car windscreen, and grabbed my shirt while I was driving. I had officially been scared and saw for the first time that he might really be dangerous. I told him I could not be with him after the damage to my brother's car. My family would never look at him the same and would ban me from seeing him. The very next morning, he made me pick him up at 8 a.m., and he took the car to get the window fixed so I wouldn't leave him. In short words, I didn't forgive him. A week later, a week of hundreds of missed calls, thousands of messages, off every single social media possible. He began sending me photos of bottles and Xanax that he was buying, telling me that he was going to eat them all, and it was going to be all my fault. My heart dropped, and I answered his call and begged him not to be so silly. I told him I would go and see him that afternoon to make sure he was okay, and not to get back together. He seemed happy with that and hung up the phone. That day, I was with a couple girlfriends at a pool party with some of my old friends that he didn't particularly like. After being there for maybe an hour or so, I bet you can guess who just lets themselves in and walks straight inside, demanding to everyone that I leave right now. I refused, and I was petrified. His eyes, I knew that look, the way his green eyes turned almost black when he was in a rage. I continued to refuse, and told him I would come outside and talk to him if he let me bring one of the boys outside to make sure I was okay. He didn't take that one bit, and decided to leave. Okay, that was a relief for me. Less than 20 seconds later, we hear smashing in the side street. The whole house ran outside to investigate, and watched as Trent ran back to his car and sped off after ripping off the windshield wipers of another one of my best friend's cars and shattering each window. At this point, we were all so worried and angry and confused, so we decided that we should drop the damaged car to my house, so it was off the streets and somewhere safe. However, my car was parked a few streets over. I got into the car and began driving when I was rammed into an intersection. My car was spinning, and I quickly gained control, only to realize that he was chasing me in his own car. We zoomed through the traffic, through red lights, intersections, squeezing through almost impossible car spaces, like in a movie. I almost hit 3 pedestrians and God knows how many cars. He chased me down the streets, continuously ramming me, then slowing down and speeding up just to ram me again. Glancing back in my rearview mirror, I saw him laughing and taunting me. Those eyes I will never forget. Immediately when I noticed him chasing me, I called 000, it's Australia's 911, and tried frantically explaining to the operator where I was and what was happening whilst being rammed and trying to dodge cars and people and sidewalks, poles and street signs. I thought I would throw him off and turn into a car park that was right there, but he was too quick and sped in front of my car, locking me in while he blocked the exit with his car. The door opened and he stepped outside, throwing himself at the windows and trying to rip open the doors. I screamed into the phone and begged for help. but they just could not seem to find me. Eventually, I decided that the windows were going to give out soon, and I needed to get away. So I drove up the gutter, ripping off half of the front bumper of the car, and sped all the way back up the street. I thought I got away when I saw he was struggling to get back into his car, but that relief shattered when I saw his white car right behind me again, ramming and stopping while he laughed. I drove through 3 suburbs and drove straight to my dad's house. I honked the horn like a crazy person, but his car was quick to catch up, and I could not bear the thought of putting any one of my family members at risk of this maniac, so I kept going, hoping that he wasn't quick enough to swipe my car off the cliff edge that runs alongside my street. I continued driving over the top of all of the roundabouts, but I didn't care. My mom lives around the corner from my dad's, and I started to head there, but as I reached the street, I remembered my 5-year-old sister and my mom, and I couldn't dare putting them at risk. So I kept on driving around corners, swiping into cars, and trying to find every main road possible, begging for help to the operator, and for them just to please find me. I continued to fly down the street at 120 miles per hour. I'm an 18-year-old girl. I've never driven so fast or so chaotically. After about 10 minutes of what seemed like an hour, I reached yet another main road and repeated my location to the operator, all the while being rammed and tormented. He sped up in the lane next to me, in the opposite side of the road, and swerved his car into the front of mine in an attempt to lock me in so he could try to rip me from the car. My immediate reaction was the reverse. I put the car into reverse and put the accelerator flat to the floor. It only took seconds for him to get back into his car and begin driving at me, head on. The only thing I could do was drive forwards at him. This is the part where everything went in slow motion. I saw him coming at me. We were driving at each other at about 40 miles per hour, and my only options were to either crash into a parked car next to me, crash head-on into Trent, or crash into a telegraph pole on the other side of the road. The only thing running through my mind was which way would be the quickest and least painful way to die. So I chose the pole, and I took a hard right turn as I missed the front of it by being saved by the gutter, saving my life by mere inches. This really made him mad, and he turned the car back around again and T-boned the driver's side door, pinning me in. He got out and yet again punched and kicked and slammed all the windows. Now let me tell you, this boy is at least 6 feet tall. He was massive. I stood no chance. I began to hop from seat to seat trying to stay away from him, to whichever window he broke out first. The whole chase lasted 17 minutes. This is when the sirens began to ring, and I broke down and cried, as he ran back into his car and took up off the street. He jumped 5 fences before they managed to tackle him. He spent a weekend in a holding cell, and was released on bail. My heart ached, my head spun. My mental illness had reached an all-time low, and without him I was ready to die. The situation made me want to die, but for some strange reason I still loved him. It made me sick, but I still did. He was handed a restraining order, but that didn't stop him. The day of his release he began apologizing, begging, crying, saying he had no memory of what he was doing, and he was so sorry and that he would never do it again. This is the part where you're all going to hate me. I wanted to take him back. I told him I still loved him, and I still spoke to him daily. He told me he wouldn't have done those things if I didn't make him so angry, and I apologized sincerely. But the jealousy and protectiveness continued. More threats. Shouldn't have called the cops and just let me kill you. I'm going to kill everyone close to you. I hope you die tomorrow. I'll laugh. The list goes on, and it took me 2 months to wake up and realize what I was doing. After he had bashed a boy that I had kissed and started doing drive-bys at places that I would hang out just staring at me. The saddest part is, when I asked him what would have happened if he had broken the windows and gotten into my car, he replied with, "I honestly don't know." So girls and boys, if you ever feel mistreated, speak up. If you notice red flags, don't ignore them. A leopard never changes his spots, and if I had have stayed with him, I wouldn't be here today to tell you the horror story that was my first relationship. So about 10 years ago, I was in college. and decided at the urging of some of my friends to do an open invite D&D session at my apartment. It was really close to the college itself, but not on campus, and it wasn't part of the dorms in any way. It was above a restaurant, so it was pretty clear that my apartment had nothing to do with the student housing. This is important for later. So the night comes and the stage is set. All in all, everyone seems nice and things are going well enough, except for one guy. There always has to be that one guy. So I try to let it slide. He's being really pushy and going on and on about his character's background and this and that, when we have not even got to him yet, and are just trying to set up the story and play the game. Then, because he has some grudge against another guy there, he starts passing me notes and trying to get me to randomly help him kill this guy's character, for no reason. First of all, that would have made no sense in the setting of the game. Secondly, that would accomplish literally nothing for those who don't play D&D. It's not like if your character dies in a random one-off game, you have to just trash it and never bring it out again. Thirdly, this guy was just all up in my personal space, whispering in my ear and passing me notes and telling me how to play, like he was in control of the game, or me in any way. It was really uncomfortable and weird. I didn't want to make a scene, since I didn't know how everyone who showed up knew one another, and decided to just ignore him and try to have a good time, despite the fact that he would not get out of my personal space. When it became clear that I was not going to listen to him and help him kill that other guy's character, he had a meltdown. He literally stood up and started throwing D&D books at my head, all of them that he could reach, and screeching that I should have done what he told me to do, and this was my punishment, and next time I had better listen. I opened the door and told him to get out. He told me I couldn't kick him out, because somebody else had invited him. I told him that I didn't care who invited him, this was my apartment, that I paid rent for, and I had every right to kick him out, and he was lucky I wasn't calling the cops. The rest of the table backed me up and pretty much ended up having to shove him out of the door and down the stairs to get him to leave. The dude could not grasp the fact that no means no, and his actions had consequences. I'm 100% sure that no one ever made him have to follow through with any sort of punishment before, by the baffled look on his face, as I closed and locked the door behind him and went back upstairs. So I get back upstairs and people start apologizing to me and telling me he is like that all the time, and they didn't actually invite him. He just shows up wherever they go, and they can't get him to leave them alone. And every time they try, he throws a tantrum. We get back to the game, and things are going pretty well for about 20 minutes, until I hear my doorbell ring. So I go downstairs, and it's the tantrum guy with some other guy that I've never met before. The tantrum guy is standing behind this new guy with his chest puffed out, and this whole look about him, like, "You're in trouble now." So I open the door and ask if they are here to apologize for the tantrum guy assaulting me earlier. And the new guy immediately turns around to look at the tantrum guy, and it's clear he did not get the whole story. I tell the new guy what actually happened, and he tells me that he is an RA with the school, and I have to let the guy back into my apartment if I'm holding a school function. I tell the RA guy that first of all, I rent this apartment, and it is not part of student housing. As should be apparent from the fact that it is, again, above a restaurant. Secondly, even if he was an RA, which I have no proof of, as he could just be one of the tantrum guy's friends, that doesn't give him the authority over any building I'm living in, because he is not my RA. But that doesn't matter, because again, I don't live in student housing. I live in an apartment above a restaurant. Finally, that this is not a school event, it is a private gathering, which he would know if he was a real RA, and not some guy that the tantrum guy snagged to come back here to try and do I don't even know what at this point. This RA guy keeps insisting that I have to let him into my apartment, and that if I am a student, then wherever I live is student housing, and that he needs to come in to inspect the place. It becomes more and more clear that this is just some random guy that they wanted to be in my apartment for nefarious purposes, thinking that I'm here alone for some reason. I tell them that they are not getting in, and if they continue to stand there and try to get me to let them in, or if they try my door after I leave, I'm going to call the cops, and I proceed to shut the door and head back upstairs. Everyone at the party was asking who that was, and when I tell them, they all decide it's time to head home. I tell them that they really don't have to, but they tell me it's getting late and this whole thing is starting to weird them out and escalate in weird ways that I can't really blame them for. When I go downstairs and open the door for the Tantrum Guy, Tantrum Guy and the RA guy are across the street and seem amazed for some reason that these people were still in my apartment and were now leaving. I never had any more trouble with them, but I also never had another D&D night. It just didn't seem worth it. I still play, but just with groups that I know, and I never saw those two guys again. So this happened about a year ago. I like to dog sit for my coworkers in the hospital for extra cash. One of the nurses wanted me to dog sit for her while her and her family went out of town. I had done this so many times, so I had no problem dog sitting alone. She lived in a very nice area of town, so bad things weren't likely to happen, or at least that's what I thought. She told me that her husband was a police officer for the city they lived in, but his guns would be locked away. She also went on to tell me that they have a security system that will record anything by all the doors. She gave me the lock information if it was needed, but I insisted that I should be fine. Now fast forward to me dog sitting. The first couple nights were fairly normal. It was a big house, so it was a little bit creepy, but nothing I haven't dealt with before. One night, me and the boyfriend at the time were watching TV in the living room. The blinds were all open to the backyard. It was most likely around midnight, since me and him both worked night schedules, and we saw a light flash through the yard. But it wasn't a car passing by, because it angled down to the grass. The dog was in the kennel, since he was a pup, and needed to be in for sleep so the dog wouldn't have been able to go and find someone. Well, we both noticed it, so we decided to go outside and check it out. But no one was there, absolutely nothing or no one. So naturally, we went to bed, because now it was getting to be 2 a.m. While laying in the bedroom upstairs talking, we heard a door shut from downstairs. I immediately shushed my boyfriend at the time and said, "Did you hear that?" And he said, "Yeah, but I don't know what it was." He gets up to lock the bedroom door and turn off the lights. He whispers to me, "Be quiet and listen." We sat in the dark room shaking. We heard yet another door shut downstairs. He tells me, "Call the cops," as he grabbed a lamp at bedside and stands by the door. And I was on the phone with the operator. She tried to calm me down, telling me officers were on their way to the scene. Then we heard footsteps of our invader coming upstairs to where we were at. I started to quietly tell the lady on the phone the person was upstairs with us now. We heard a knock at the door and footsteps going back down the stairs. I cried, telling the lady there's a knock at the door. She reassured me that it was the cops, but I had to come downstairs to let them in. I told her, "You're insane. A person in this house, and you want me to go downstairs?" She tells me that it's protocol to let them do a search. So me and my boyfriend ran down the stairs as fast as we could to open the door, lamp still in hand. We opened the door for the cops and told them there was someone here, and what we heard, they walk into the house, telling us to wait outside while they investigate. One officer goes straight outside to the back as he yells out into the dark, "If anyone is out there, make yourself known." Me and my boyfriend heard rustling through the bushes near us. The officers didn't find anyone in the home, but we know that there was. We know what we heard. Fast forward a couple months later, we were watching a movie about an invasion. I believe it was Open House on Netflix, and we got to talking about our experiences together. Come to find out that the same day of the invasion, I believe I met the intruder. I remembered it was outside around morning time, getting ready to go into my car, when a young man walking by asked me if the car in their driveway was for sale. I'm not sure. I'm dog sitting for them, but they should be back in a few days. He thanked me kindly for texting me and walked off. I had no idea at the time what I had done, but I know that the man walking by was our invader. I still am afraid to dog sit again.